I watched my father's trembling hand hover over my champagne glass as powder cascaded from a small envelope into the golden bubbles. 25 years of unconditional love shattered in that single moment at my law school graduation party. The same man who taught me to ride bikes and read bedtime stories was now deliberately poisoning my drink. My mother stood beside him, her emerald necklace catching the chandelier light, as she whispered something about finally teaching their ungrateful daughter a lesson she would never forget. The Fairfield Country Club had never looked more elegant. White silk linens draped every table in the grand ballroom. Crystal glasses sparkled under the massive chandelier, and a string quartet played soft classical melodies in the corner. Everything was perfect for celebrating my Harvard Law School graduation exactly as my parents had planned it. I smoothed my navy blue dress and surveyed the room filled with family friends, business associates, and a few of my law school classmates who had made the trip to Connecticut. The whole scene felt surreal. After 3 years of surviving on instant noodles and library coffee, I was standing in this opulent setting, officially Clare Richardson, Juris Doctor. My father, Richard, worked the room with his usual confidence, his silver hair perfectly styled and his expensive suit tailored to perfection. He owned Richardson Construction, one of the most successful building companies in Fairfield County. Every handshake, every laugh, every conversation seemed designed to remind everyone present of our family's status in the community. My mother, Patricia, glided between groups of guests in her champagne-colored silk gown, her emerald jewelry set, catching the light with each graceful movement. She came from old Connecticut money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for generations. Her smile was radiant as she accepted congratulations on my behalf, but I noticed something strained around her eyes. Claire. Madison bounced over to me, though her usual enthusiasm seemed dimmed. My younger sister had always been the free spirit in our family, 22 years old, with wild auburn curls and an infectious laugh. She wore a simple black cocktail dress that somehow looked effortlessly chic on her petite frame. "I can't believe you actually did it," she said, wrapping me in a tight hug. "Harvard Law. Who would have thought my big sister would become such a legal eagle?" I laughed, but noticed something off in her expression. Madison had dropped out of college last spring, much to our parents' disappointment. While I had been the academic achiever with straight A's and full scholarships, Madison had always struggled with traditional education. She was brilliant in her own way, artistic and intuitive, but our parents never quite understood her different approach to life. "Where have you been hiding all evening?" I asked. "I've barely seen you since the ceremony this morning." Madison's green eyes, so similar to our mother's, flickered away from mine. "Just mingling. You know how these things are." Before I could probe further, my law school friend Jessica approached us. She looked slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the event. "Claire, this place is incredible," Jessica said, adjusting her simple black dress. "Your parents really went all out." "They believe in celebrating achievements," I replied, though something about that statement felt hollow even as I said it. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing the dynamics around me more carefully. Conversations seemed to pause when I approached certain groups. My parents' business associates offered congratulations, but their smiles felt forced. Even family friends who had known me since childhood seemed to regard me with a mixture of pride and something else I couldn't quite identify. I had accepted a position at Morrison, Blake and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in Boston. The starting salary was more than my parents had ever expected me to earn, and the firm specialized in corporate fraud investigation. It was everything I had worked toward, yet the atmosphere tonight felt strangely tense. During dinner, Uncle Gerald, my father's business partner, made a toast that left me feeling unsettled. To Clare, he said, raising his wine glass. May she never forget where she came from, no matter how high she climbs. The applause that followed seemed subdued, and I caught my mother shooting Gerald a sharp look across the table. Later, as the party was winding down and guests moved toward the terrace for the champagne toast, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, I passed the coat room and heard voices inside. The door was slightly ajar, and I recognized my parents' voices immediately. She thinks she's better than us now with that fancy degree, my mother was saying, her voice sharp with resentment I had never heard before. 25 years of feeding and housing her, and she's planning to move across the country. We need to remind her where she came from. Patricia, keep your voice down, my father replied. Gerald's plan will work. She needs to learn some humility before she gets too big for her britches. I pressed myself against the wall outside the door, my heart pounding. Gerald's plan. What were they talking about? I still think this is too risky, my father continued. What if someone notices? No one will notice anything, my mother said coldly. It'll just look like she got a little too excited celebrating and couldn't handle her champagne. By tomorrow morning, she'll be too embarrassed to hold her head up high around here. I heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly ducked into an alcove, my mind reeling. My parents were planning something to humiliate me at my own graduation party. The people who had raised me, supported my education, and celebrated my achievements were conspiring to tear me down the moment I succeeded beyond their expectations. My hands were shaking as I made my way back to the ballroom. The cheerful chatter and clinking glasses now sounded sinister to my ears. I looked at my parents with new eyes, seeing calculation where I had once seen love, manipulation where I had once seen support. The champagne toast was about to begin, and suddenly I understood that whatever they had planned was about to happen. I watched my father move toward the bar, where the champagne glasses were arranged, and my blood turned to ice. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My parents, the two people I trusted most in the world, were actively plotting against me at what should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. I moved through the crowd in a daze, trying to process what I had overheard while maintaining a facade of celebration. The string quartet finished their piece, and Uncle Gerald tapped his knife against a crystal glass to call for attention. The room gradually quieted as guests gathered for the traditional champagne toast. Ladies and gentlemen, Gerald announced with his politician's smile, it's time to raise our glasses to our guest of honor. I positioned myself where I could see my father clearly as he moved behind the elegant bar setup. Richard Richardson had always been meticulous about details, and tonight was no exception. He personally handled each champagne flute, ensuring they were perfectly polished and filled to the exact same level. My stomach churned as I watched him reach the tray, marked with small silver stars, the one designated for family members. There were 4 glasses arranged in a precise line, one for him, one for my mother, one for Madison, and one for me. That's when I saw it happen. My father's hand moved to his jacket pocket and extracted a small white envelope, the kind used for artificial sweetener packets at restaurants. His movements were quick and practiced, suggesting this wasn't spontaneous. With a glance around to ensure no one was watching, he tore open the envelope and held it over my champagne glass. The powder that fell from the envelope was white and fine like confectioner's sugar, but it dissolved instantly into the golden liquid. My father used a small stirring rod to make sure it mixed completely, then carefully disposed of the envelope in a waste bin behind the bar. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. My father had just put an unknown substance into my drink. The conversation I had overheard suddenly took on a much more sinister meaning. What exactly was their plan? What kind of powder dissolves that quickly and completely? I forced myself to breathe normally as my mother approached the bar area. She moved with purpose, her emerald jewelry catching the light as she leaned close to my father. "Is it done?" she whispered, thinking the music and conversation would mask her words. "It's done," he replied grimly. "God forgive us, but she needs to learn that actions have consequences." My mother's perfectly manicured hand touched his arm. "This is for her own good, Richard. She's gotten too big for her britches. A little humbling will remind her that family comes first." The casual cruelty in her voice was like a knife through my chest. These weren't strangers plotting against me. These were the people who had sung me lullabies, helped with homework, and cheered at every school play and academic award ceremony. Yet here they stood calmly discussing drugging their own daughter. My father picked up the tray of family champagne glasses, my poisoned drink clearly visible among them. As he turned toward our table, I realized I had maybe 30 seconds before he would expect me to take that glass and toast to my own downfall. Panic flooded my system, but my legal training kicked in. I needed evidence, but more immediately, I needed to avoid drinking whatever they had put in that champagne. My mind raced through possibilities. Could I claim to feel sick? Could I accidentally knock over the glass? That's when I noticed Madison approaching from the opposite direction, looking pale and distracted. She'd been acting strange all evening, and now I wondered if she somehow knew about our parents' plan. "Claire." Madison reached me just as our father arrived with the champagne tray. "I've been looking for you everywhere. I wanted to apologize for being so distant tonight." She looked genuinely upset, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know I've been weird lately, and I didn't want you to think I wasn't proud of you. I'm just feeling kind of lost, you know. You're this brilliant lawyer now, and I'm just me." My heart broke for her, even as my mind continued to race. Madison had always struggled with feeling overshadowed by my academic achievements, but she had never let it affect our relationship before. "Madison, you know you're amazing exactly as you are," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as our father approached with the poisoned champagne. "Here we are," Richard announced with false cheer, offering the tray to our small family circle. "The guest of honor gets first pick." He gestured toward my designated glass, the one I now knew contained whatever substance they had chosen for their twisted lesson. My hand trembled as I reached toward it, and in that moment of crisis, a desperate idea formed. "Actually, Dad, I think Madison should go first," I said, with a bright smile that felt like it might crack my face. "She's been feeling left out tonight, and I want her to know how much family means to me." Before anyone could object, I picked up Madison's clean glass and handed her mine the poison one. The switch happened so quickly that our parents couldn't intervene without making a scene in front of the gathered guests. "To my amazing little sister," I said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "who reminds me every day that success is meaningless without family to share it with." Madison beamed at the gesture, clearly touched by what she thought was sisterly generosity. She raised the poisoned champagne glass high. "And to my brilliant sister Clare, who proves that dreams really do come true with hard work and determination." The crowd around us applauded the sweet moment between sisters, completely unaware of the horror unfolding. I watched in growing dread as Madison brought the glass to her lips and drank deeply, savoring the expensive champagne. Our parents stood frozen, their faces masks of shock and growing panic, as they realized their plan had gone catastrophically wrong. The substance meant for me was now in Madison's system, and they had no idea how it would affect her differently than intended. Within minutes, Madison's complexion began to change. The healthy glow in her cheeks faded to an alarming pallor, and she began blinking rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. "I feel really strange," she murmured, reaching out to steady herself against the table. "Everything's spinning." That's when the convulsions began. Madison doubled over, clutching her stomach, and began vomiting violently onto the pristine ballroom floor. Her entire body shook with tremors, and her breathing became rapid and shallow. "Call 911, someone screamed as Madison collapsed completely, her auburn curls spreading across the marble floor as her body continued to convulse. The elegant graduation party transformed into chaos as guests backed away in horror, and my father dropped to his knees beside Madison, his face white with terror. My mother stood motionless, her hands pressed to her mouth, as the full magnitude of their mistake became clear. As I knelt beside my unconscious sister listening to the approaching sirens, one thought echoed in my mind. Whatever they had put in, that champagne wasn't meant to simply humiliate me. The violent reaction Madison was experiencing suggested something far more dangerous, possibly deadly. My parents hadn't just planned to embarrass their successful daughter. They had planned something much worse, and now the wrong person was paying the price. The ambulance ride to Greenwich Hospital felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Madison lay strapped to the gurney, her face gray, and her breathing labored, while paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her vital signs. I held her cold hand and whispered apologies she couldn't hear, knowing that my desperate decision to switch our glasses had put her in mortal danger. The emergency room erupted into controlled chaos when we arrived. Doctors and nurses surrounded Madison's stretcher, shouting medical terms I couldn't understand while wheeling her toward a treatment room. I tried to follow, but a nurse gently but firmly directed me to the waiting area. "We need space to work," she said kindly. "The doctors will update you as soon as they can." My parents arrived 15 minutes later, their evening clothes looking incongruous in the sterile hospital environment. My father's usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, and my mother's makeup had smeared from tears. She probably didn't even realize she was crying. They sat across from me in the waiting room, and for the first time in my life, I looked at them with complete clarity. These people had raised me, loved me, supported my education, and celebrated my achievements. They had also deliberately poisoned my drink at my graduation party. "The doctors are pumping her stomach," my father said quietly, his voice hollow. "They're running tests to determine what she ingested." "What did you give her, Dad?" I asked, my voice carefully controlled. "What exactly did you put in my champagne glass?" My mother's sharp intake of breath confirmed that they knew I understood what had happened. Patricia Richardson, who had taught me proper etiquette and the importance of always telling the truth, looked me directly in the eyes and lied. "We don't know what you're talking about, Claire. Madison must have had some kind of allergic reaction or food poisoning." But my father crumbled under the weight of guilt and terror. Richard Richardson, the successful businessman who commanded respect throughout Fairfield County, buried his face in his hands and began to weep. "It was just supposed to be sleeping pills," he whispered. "Gerald said it would just make you drowsy and confused. You would seem intoxicated from the champagne, and everyone would think you couldn't handle success gracefully." The admission hit me like a physical blow. Sleeping pills. "Dad, what kind of sleeping pills? How many?" "Gerald gave me the powder," he said, his voice breaking. "He said it was a harmless sedative that would teach you some humility. We never meant for Madison to get hurt. We never meant for anyone to get hurt." "Gerald," I repeated, my mind racing. Uncle Gerald, my father's business partner, had orchestrated this entire plan. But why? What possible motive could he have for wanting to drug me into unconsciousness at my own graduation party? A doctor in blue scrubs approached our small group, her expression grave. "Are you Madison Richardson's family?" We all stood immediately, my father's expensive suit wrinkled from hours of anxious sitting. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen," she said. "We've stabilized Madison's condition, but I need to ask you some very serious questions. The substance she ingested wasn't simple sleeping medication. Our blood tests show concentrated digitalis in her system." "Digitalis," my mother repeated faintly. "It's a heart medication," Dr. Chen explained. "In controlled doses, it's used to treat certain cardiac conditions. In higher concentrations, it's extremely dangerous and potentially fatal. It can cause exactly the symptoms Madison experienced: nausea, vomiting, cardiac arrhythmias, and seizures." The doctor's words sent ice through my veins. Digitalis. This wasn't about humiliation or teaching me a lesson. Someone had tried to poison me with a substance that could have caused heart failure. The amount in Madison's system would have been dangerous for anyone. Dr. Chen continued, "But it's particularly concerning because Madison has an underlying heart condition that makes her more vulnerable to digitalis toxicity." "What heart condition?" my father asked sharply. "Madison never told us about any heart problems." "Mitral valve prolapse," Dr. Chen said, consulting her chart. "It's usually a benign condition, but it makes patients more sensitive to certain medications." "Did Madison never mention experiencing heart palpitations, chest pain, or shortness of breath during exercise?" My mother and father exchanged bewildered looks, but I remembered something Madison had mentioned months ago about feeling tired easily and sometimes experiencing rapid heartbeats. She had dismissed it as stress from disappointing our parents by dropping out of college. "She mentioned some symptoms," I said quietly, "but she thought it was anxiety." Dr. Chen nodded gravely. "The digitalis could have caused complete heart failure in someone with Madison's condition. She's extremely fortunate that you called emergency services quickly. We'll need to monitor her for at least 48 hours to ensure there are no lasting cardiac effects." After the doctor left to check on Madison, I confronted my parents in the empty hospital corridor. The overhead fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on their faces, making them look older and more fragile than I had ever seen them. "Gerald gave you digitalis," I said, my voice steady, despite the rage building inside me. "He told you it was sleeping medication, but it was actually a heart medication that could have killed me." "Claire, you have to believe us," my mother said desperately. "We thought it was just something to make you sleepy. Gerald said it would be like you had too much champagne. We never would have agreed to anything dangerous." "But you did agree to drug your own daughter," I shot back. "You were willing to humiliate me at my graduation party because what? Because I was successful, because I was moving to Boston for my career." My father leaned against the hospital wall as if his legs could no longer support him. "We were scared," he admitted. "You were leaving, starting this big important job, and we felt like you were growing beyond us. Gerald said you needed to remember your place. Remember that family comes first." "Gerald," I repeated again. "What exactly is Gerald's role in all this? Why would your business partner care whether I remember my place?" Before either parent could answer, a weak voice called my name from the doorway of Madison's room. My sister was awake, propped up in the hospital bed, with IV lines running into both arms. Her auburn hair was tangled against the white pillowcase, but her green eyes were alert. "Claire," she whispered as I rushed to her bedside, "I need to tell you something important. About Gerald, about what they were really planning." Madison's revelation would change everything I thought I understood about this nightmare. "I know what they did to you," she said, her voice gaining strength despite her ordeal. "I saw them talking to Gerald earlier about getting something to teach you a lesson. But Claire, they weren't working alone. Gerald had his own reasons for wanting you out of the picture." She gripped my hand with surprising force, her eyes wide with urgency. Your new job, Madison continued. The law firm in Boston. Gerald found out what kind of cases they handle. He's been stealing money from the construction company for years, and he knew you'd eventually figure it out with your legal training. The poisoning wasn't about family loyalty, Claire. It was about covering up crimes. Madison's words hit me like a thunderbolt. I stared at my sister's pale face, trying to process the implications of what she was telling me. Gerald hadn't just manipulated my parents into drugging me out of spite or family dynamics. He had orchestrated the entire plan to protect himself from criminal prosecution. Madison, slow down, I said, pulling a chair close to her hospital bed. Tell me exactly what you saw and heard. Despite her exhaustion from the digitalis poisoning, Madison's eyes burned with determination. It started about 3 weeks ago. She began, her voice growing stronger. I was at the office helping Dad with some filing when Gerald called him into a private meeting. They thought I was wearing headphones, but I could hear everything through the door. My parents had followed us into Madison's room and were listening with growing horror as the true scope of Gerald's manipulation became clear. Gerald was panicking about something, Madison continued. He kept saying that Claire's new job was going to be a problem, that Morrison Blake and Associates specializes in corporate fraud investigation. He said it was only a matter of time before you started looking into Richardson Construction's finances. I felt my blood run cold. Morrison Blake and Associates was indeed known for their expertise in uncovering white-collar crimes, particularly embezzlement and financial fraud within family businesses. It was one of the reasons they had recruited me so aggressively. What exactly did Gerald say? I pressed. Madison closed her eyes, concentrating. He told Dad that he had been moving money around for years to keep the business profitable, but that you might not understand the creative accounting methods he had used. He said you might misinterpret legitimate business practices as criminal activity. Creative accounting, I repeated grimly. In legal terms, that was often code for embezzlement. But there's more, Madison said, reaching for her phone on the bedside table with shaking hands. Gerald asked me to help him destroy some old financial documents. He said they were outdated and taking up too much storage space. But Claire, I took pictures before I destroyed them. With trembling fingers, Madison showed me her phone's photo gallery. Image after image revealed damning evidence invoices for materials that were never delivered, contracts with subcontractors whose names appeared on no legitimate business registrations, and payment authorizations for work that was never completed. Look at this one, Madison said, enlarging a photograph of a bank transfer authorization. Gerald moved $230,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands last month. The notation says it was for overseas material purchases, but I checked the project files. All the materials for that job were sourced locally. I studied the documents with my trained legal eye, and the pattern became crystal clear. Gerald Patterson had been systematically embezzling from Richardson Construction for years, possibly decades. The amounts were staggering, over $2.3 million in fraudulent transactions spanning the past 5 years alone. Madison, this is incredible evidence. I said, photographing her phone screen with my own device. But why didn't you tell anyone sooner? I was scared, she admitted. Gerald has always been like family to us. When he asked me to destroy the documents, he made it sound like he was protecting the business from unnecessary government scrutiny. I didn't realize what I was really seeing until after I heard him talking to Dad about drugging you. My father, who had been silent throughout Madison's revelation, suddenly spoke up. Gerald told us you were becoming arrogant and ungrateful. He said, his voice heavy with shame. He said successful lawyers often turn against their own families, using their legal knowledge to create problems where none existed. He convinced us that you might try to interfere with business operations. My mother added, tears streaming down her face. He said a little humiliation would remind you to respect your family's livelihood. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Gerald had recognized that my career in corporate fraud investigation posed an existential threat to his embezzlement scheme. Rather than cease his criminal activity, he had chosen to eliminate the threat by manipulating my parents into poisoning me. The digitalis wasn't meant to just humiliate me. I said, the full scope of Gerald's plan becoming clear. If I had drunk that champagne, I would have been hospitalized or worse. I would have missed my start date at Morrison Blake and Associates. Maybe I would have been too sick to work for weeks or months. Or you might have died, Madison said quietly. Dr. Chen said the dosage was potentially fatal. A new voice interrupted our family discussion. Actually, death was never the intended outcome. We all turned to see Uncle Gerald standing in the doorway of Madison's hospital room. He looked perfectly composed in his expensive navy suit, his silver hair neatly styled, and his face wearing an expression of cold calculation I had never seen before. "Gerald," my father said weakly, "what are you doing here?" "Cleaning up loose ends," Gerald replied, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "I heard about Madison's unfortunate accident and came to check on the family." The casual way he referred to Madison's poisoning as an accident made my skin crawl. This was a man I had called Uncle Gerald my entire life, who had attended family barbecues and birthday parties, who had given me graduation gifts and career advice. "You tried to kill me," I said, standing between Gerald and Madison's hospital bed. Gerald's laugh was genuinely amused, which somehow made it even more chilling. "Kill you, Claire, my dear. You give me far too much credit for sophistication. The digitalis was meant to make you violently ill for several weeks, nothing more. Unfortunately, your sister's previously undiagnosed heart condition created complications I hadn't anticipated. You've been stealing from my father's company for years." I continued my legal training, helping me maintain composure despite my fear. "Stealing is such an ugly word," Gerald replied smoothly. "I prefer to think of it as receiving delayed compensation for decades of partnership. Your father has always been the public face of Richardson Construction, but I've been the brains behind our success. It seemed only fair that I should receive a more equitable share of the profits." The sociopathic calm in Gerald's voice was terrifying. He was discussing embezzlement and attempted poisoning as if they were minor business disagreements. "The money you've stolen belongs to my family," I said. Gerald's expression hardened. "Your family," he repeated. "Everything you've achieved, Claire, has been built on the foundation I created. Richardson Construction paid for your private school education, your college tuition, your law school expenses. In a very real sense, I funded your Harvard Law degree." "With money you stole," Madison said from her hospital bed, her voice stronger now, despite her physical weakness. "Money I earned," Gerald corrected, "and now I'm simply ensuring that my investment in your family doesn't turn against me. Unfortunately, Claire's career choice poses certain complications that need to be addressed." As Gerald spoke, I realized that we were in serious danger. This wasn't a man who would be content with covering up past crimes. He was clearly prepared to commit new ones to protect himself. "What happens now, Gerald?" I asked, trying to buy time while calculating our options. Gerald smiled, and for the first time since I had known him, the expression was genuinely menacing. "Now, my dear niece, we discuss the terms of your continued silence, because this conversation has revealed that there are far more people who know about my business arrangements than I had realized." He looked meaningfully at Madison, then at my parents, and finally back at me. And that creates a problem that goes well beyond your career in corporate fraud investigation. Gerald's threat was crystal clear. Madison's survival and knowledge of his crimes had transformed this from a simple case of embezzlement and attempted poisoning into something far more dangerous. He wasn't just protecting his past crimes anymore. He was preparing to commit new ones to silence potential witnesses. The revelation that would save us was still to come. But at that moment, facing Gerald's cold calculation in my sister's hospital room, I realized that my family's lives hung in the balance of decisions I was about to make. The confrontation with Gerald in Madison's hospital room ended when a nurse arrived to check on my sister's vital signs, forcing Gerald to maintain his facade of concerned family friend. But his threats lingered in the air like poison gas, and I knew our family was in mortal danger from a man who had already proven his willingness to kill. After Gerald left promising to continue our discussion soon, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't trust the local police who might be influenced by Gerald's connections in the business community. I couldn't involve my parents who were still processing their own manipulation and guilt. This required professional help from someone outside Gerald's sphere of influence. I called Professor Elizabeth Hartman, my favorite instructor from Harvard Law School and a former federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime. Despite the late hour, she answered on the second ring. "Clare Richardson," she said warmly. "Congratulations on your graduation. How was the celebration?" "Professor Hartman, I need your help," I said, cutting straight to the point. "I'm dealing with a situation that involves embezzlement, attempted murder, and ongoing threats to my family." The warmth in her voice immediately shifted to professional concern. "Where are you right now?" "Greenwich Hospital. My sister was poisoned tonight with digitalis that was meant for me." "I'm driving up from New Haven immediately," Professor Hartman said without hesitation. "Don't discuss this situation with anyone else until I arrive. And Claire, if you're in immediate physical danger, call the police." While waiting for Professor Hartman, I used my phone to research everything I could find about Gerald Patterson. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Gerald wasn't just embezzling from Richardson Construction. A deeper search through public records and news archives revealed a pattern of suspicious incidents surrounding his previous business partnerships. In 1998, Gerald's first business partner, William Torres, had died suddenly from what was ruled a heart attack, though he was only 42 years old and had no history of cardiac problems. The death occurred just weeks before Torres was scheduled to meet with accountants about discrepancies in their company's financial records. In 2005, Gerald's second partner, Maria Santos, had been hospitalized with mysterious symptoms that doctors initially couldn't diagnose. She eventually recovered, but sold her share of their business to Gerald for far below market value, citing health concerns that prevented her from continuing their partnership. The pattern was becoming terrifyingly clear. Gerald Patterson had been eliminating business partners who posed threats to his financial schemes for over 20 years. Madison and I weren't his first victims. We were just his latest. When Professor Hartman arrived at the hospital at 3 a.m, she brought with her a briefcase full of legal resources and a grim expression that told me she understood the severity of our situation. "Show me everything," she said, settling into a chair in the hospital's family consultation room. I laid out Madison's photographs, the evidence of Gerald's embezzlement, the timeline of suspicious deaths and illnesses among his former partners, and a detailed account of the evening's events. Professor Hartman studied each piece of evidence with the methodical precision that had made her legendary in federal courtrooms. "This is a RICO case," she said, finally referring to the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. Gerald Patterson isn't just an embezzler. He's been running a criminal enterprise for decades using intimidation, poisoning, and possibly murder to maintain control over his victims. What do we do? I asked. We build an airtight case, and we do it quickly, Professor Hartman replied. Gerald knows that Madison survived and that she has evidence. He also knows that you have the legal training to recognize his crimes for what they are. He's going to escalate his efforts to silence all potential witnesses. Working through the night, Professor Hartman contacted her former colleagues at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Unit. By dawn, we had scheduled a meeting with Special Agent David Morrison, whose team specialized in cases involving financial fraud and racketeering. Agent Morrison arrived at the hospital that morning with a small team of investigators and accountants. He was a serious man in his 40s, with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Richardson," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Professor Hartman has briefed me on your situation. This is potentially one of the most sophisticated, long-term embezzlement schemes we've encountered in this region." The FBI team set up a temporary command center in the hospital's conference room, using Madison's photographs and my legal analysis to build a comprehensive picture of Gerald's crimes. Their forensic accountants confirmed what I had suspected. Gerald had stolen over $2.3 million from Richardson Construction alone, and potentially millions more from his previous partnerships. "We want to move on this immediately," Agent Morrison said, "but we need more evidence. What we have is compelling, but a good defense attorney could argue that the financial irregularities were legitimate business practices that your family simply didn't understand." "What kind of evidence do you need?" I asked. "A confession," Agent Morrison replied. "We need Gerald to admit to the crimes in his own words, preferably while discussing his future plans to silence witnesses." Professor Hartman leaned forward. "You're talking about a wire operation." "Exactly," Agent Morrison confirmed. "Claire, we want you to arrange a meeting with Gerald. You'll wear a recording device and get him to incriminate himself. But I want to be completely honest with you about the risks. If Gerald suspects what you're doing, you could be in serious physical danger." I looked through the conference room window toward Madison's hospital room, where my sister was slowly recovering from the poison Gerald had meant for me. I thought about the other victims whose deaths or illnesses had been dismissed as natural causes or mysterious accidents. "I'll do it," I said. The plan we developed was elegantly simple. I would call Gerald and request a private meeting to discuss terms for my family's silence about his financial activities. I would suggest that we meet at Richardson Construction's office building after hours when we could speak privately without interruption. Agent Morrison's team would install surveillance equipment throughout the building and position agents nearby for my protection. I would wear a small recording device and attempt to get Gerald to confess not only to the embezzlement, but also to his pattern of eliminating threats through poisoning and intimidation. Remember, Professor Hartman coached me as FBI technicians fitted the tiny recording device. Your goal is to get him talking about his past crimes and his future plans. Let him think he's in control of the conversation. Men like Gerald often can't resist explaining how clever they've been. That evening, I made the call that would either bring Gerald to justice or put me in mortal danger. "Uncle Gerald," I said, using the family nickname that now felt like ashes in my mouth. "We need to talk privately about our family's situation. I think we can reach an understanding that benefits everyone." Gerald's voice was smooth and confident. "I was hoping you'd see reason, Claire. Meet me at the Richardson Construction offices at 9 tonight. We'll discuss the terms of our arrangement like civilized people." As I hung up the phone, Agent Morrison placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "Gerald Patterson has been destroying lives for decades. Tonight, we're going to stop him." But even as I prepared for the most dangerous evening of my life, I couldn't shake the feeling that Gerald had one more surprise waiting for us. His confidence on the phone suggested that he believed he held all the cards in this deadly game. I was about to discover just how right that instinct was. The Richardson construction offices felt different in the darkness. The building where I had spent countless childhood afternoons doing homework while my father worked late had transformed into something sinister and threatening. Every shadow seemed to hide potential danger as I walked through the familiar hallways toward my father's office, where Gerald was waiting. Agent Morrison's voice crackled softly through the tiny earpiece hidden beneath my hair. "We have eyes on you, Claire. Gerald arrived 20 minutes ago and swept the building for surveillance equipment. He found and disabled 3 of our cameras, but he missed the ones in the main office. We can see and hear everything." I took a deep breath and opened the door to the executive suite. Gerald sat behind my father's mahogany desk, looking completely at ease as he reviewed financial documents spread across the workspace. He had removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie as if preparing for a long negotiation. "Claire," he said warmly, gesturing to the chair across from the desk. "Please sit down. We have much to discuss." I sat carefully hyper-aware of the recording device hidden in my clothing and the federal agents positioned around the building. Gerald's calm demeanor was unsettling. He seemed genuinely relaxed, even cheerful, despite knowing that Madison had survived his poisoning attempt and possessed evidence of his crimes. "You seem remarkably confident for someone whose embezzlement scheme has been exposed," I said, deciding to start aggressively. Gerald chuckled a sound that would have seemed friendly in any other context. "Embezzlement scheme," he repeated thoughtfully. "You know, Claire, that's exactly the kind of legal terminology that makes you such a threat. Most people would look at my financial arrangements with your father and see successful business management. But you, with your Harvard training and your new job investigating corporate fraud, you see crimes." "Because they are crimes," I replied. "You've stolen over $2 million from my father's company." "Stolen," Gerald mused, leaning back in the leather chair. "Such a harsh word. I prefer to think of it as delayed compensation for years of unacknowledged contribution to this company's success." He stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the darkened parking lot below. "Your father is a good man, Claire, but he's never been the visionary that Richardson Construction needed. Every major contract we've secured, every expansion we've achieved, every innovation we've implemented has been my idea, my planning, my execution. Yet Richard gets all the credit because his name is on the building." Gerald's confession was exactly what Agent Morrison needed, but I could sense there was more to his story. His confidence suggested he wasn't just admitting to past crimes. He was building toward something bigger. "What about William Torres and Maria Santos?" I asked. "Your previous partners who conveniently died or became ill when they discovered your financial irregularities." Gerald turned back toward me, and for the first time his expression showed genuine surprise. "Very thorough research, counselor. I'm impressed. Most people never make those connections." He returned to the desk, but instead of sitting, he opened the top drawer and removed a small glass vial filled with white powder. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the same substance he had used to poison my champagne. "William Torres was a problem," Gerald said, conversationally rolling the vial between his fingers. "He was planning to bring in outside accountants to review our books. He would have discovered the financial arrangements I had made for myself, and he lacked the vision to understand their necessity." Agent Morrison's voice whispered urgently in my earpiece, "Keep him talking. We're moving into position. So you killed him, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I solved a business problem, Gerald corrected. A small amount of concentrated digitalis in his morning coffee produced what appeared to be a natural heart attack. William was overweight, stressed, and had a family history of cardiac issues. No one questioned the cause of death. The casual way Gerald discussed murder made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to continue the conversation. And Maria Santos? Maria was more fortunate, Gerald replied. She survived her lesson, though it took several months for her to fully recover. But she understood the message and chose to sell her share of our business rather than pursue uncomfortable questions about our financial management. Gerald set the vial of poison on the desk between us, a clear threat. Which brings us to your situation, Claire. You and Madison have created a complex problem that requires a comprehensive solution. What kind of solution? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Gerald smiled, and the expression was genuinely warm, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than any sneer or scowl could have been. Your sister's unfortunate reaction to the digitalis has created complications I didn't anticipate. She survived when she should have simply been incapacitated. Worse, she had been photographing documents I specifically asked her to destroy. He leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk, like a patient teacher explaining a difficult concept. You see, Claire, I initially planned only to prevent you from starting your new job. A few weeks of mysterious illness would have delayed your career just long enough for me to complete my financial arrangements and retire to a country without extradition treaties with the United States. The recording device was capturing every word of Gerald's confession, but his matter-of-fact tone made it clear that he believed neither Madison nor I would live to testify against him. But now, Gerald continued, both you and Madison possess knowledge that makes you permanent threats to my security. Your parents are also problematic since they can testify about my involvement in the poisoning incident. My mouth went dry as I realized the full scope of Gerald's plan. He wasn't just planning to kill me. He was planning to eliminate my entire family. You're talking about murdering 4 people, I said. I'm talking about solving a business problem, Gerald replied. 4 people who unfortunately learned too much about financial arrangements they weren't equipped to understand. He picked up the vial of digitalis again, examining it in the light from the desk lamp. The beauty of this particular solution is its apparent naturalness. Heart attack, strokes, sudden cardiac events, all tragic but believable, especially in a family dealing with the stress of their daughter's mysterious illness and their business partner's unexpected retirement. Agent Morrison's voice crackled urgently in my earpiece. He's planning mass murder. We're coming in now. But Gerald's next words stopped me cold. Of course, he said with his terrifying calm smile. I should mention that I've already put the first phase of this plan into motion. Your parents are at home right now enjoying a late dinner that I personally prepared for them. The digitalis takes several hours to reach full effect, so they're probably just beginning to feel unwell. My heart nearly stopped. You poisoned my parents. Insurance, Gerald replied. I needed to ensure your cooperation during our conversation tonight. If you behave reasonably and accept the inevitable, your parents' deaths will appear natural and peaceful. If you do anything to complicate matters well, their final hours could be quite unpleasant. The trap was closing around us. Even if the FBI arrested Gerald immediately, my parents might already be dying from the same poison that had nearly killed Madison. But Gerald had made one crucial mistake. His arrogance had led him to confess everything while assuming he held all the power. What he didn't know was that Agent Morrison's team had been monitoring not just our conversation, but also my parents' home. Agent Morrison's voice came through my earpiece with military precision. Medical teams are already with your parents. We've been watching the house since this afternoon. Your father never had the chance to consume anything Gerald prepared. We're moving in now. The office door burst open as federal agents flooded the room, weapons drawn, and voices shouting commands. Gerald's expression of confident control transformed into shock and rage as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. Gerald Patterson. Agent Morrison announced his gun trained on the man who had terrorized my family. You're under arrest for attempted murder, racketeering, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. As agents handcuffed Gerald and read him his rights, he looked at me with something approaching respect. Well played, counselor, he said. I underestimated the daughter of the family I've been controlling for so many years. But the confrontation wasn't over yet. Gerald's final act of spite would test everything I had learned about justice, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family loyalty. You should know, Gerald said as agents led him toward the door, that even in federal prison, I have resources and connections. Your family will never be truly safe as long as I'm alive to remember what you've cost me. His threat hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, but I knew that Gerald Patterson's reign of terror was finally ending. The evidence we had gathered would ensure he spent the rest of his life behind bars, and my family would finally be free from the manipulation and fear that had defined our lives for far too long. The real work of healing and rebuilding trust was just beginning, but for the first time in months, I felt hope that we could emerge from this nightmare stronger and more connected than ever before. 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in Hartford, Connecticut, watching Gerald Patterson receive his sentence. The judge's words echoed through the marble-columned courtroom with the weight of final justice: 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Gerald had aged dramatically during his time in custody awaiting trial. His silver hair had turned completely white, and the confident bearing that had once made him seem so authoritative had crumbled into the posture of a broken man. As federal marshals led him away in shackles, he glanced back at my family one last time. The hatred in his eyes had been replaced by something that looked almost like regret. The trial had been a media sensation that exposed not only Gerald's decades-long criminal enterprise, but also the sophisticated methods he had used to manipulate and control his victims. Forensic accountants testified that Gerald had stolen over $4.7 million from various partnerships throughout his career. Medical experts explained how he had used digitalis poisoning to eliminate threats, making murders appear to be natural deaths. Most importantly, the trial had revealed Gerald's final desperate gambit. From prison, he had attempted to orchestrate one last act of revenge by paying other inmates to target my family. But federal prosecutors had intercepted his communications, adding conspiracy and solicitation charges that sealed his fate permanently. Madison had recovered fully from her poisoning ordeal, though the experience had changed her in profound ways. She decided to return to college with a new focus on pre-med studies inspired by the doctors and nurses who had saved her life. Her heart condition was now properly managed with medication and regular monitoring, and she had thrown herself into her studies with the same determination that had once driven my academic achievements. I want to help people the way Dr. Chen helped me, Madison told me one afternoon as we walked through the campus of her new university. I never understood what I wanted to do with my life until I experienced what it felt like to almost lose it. Our parents had undergone their own transformation during the months following Gerald's arrest. The revelation that they had been manipulated and drugged by someone they trusted for decades had forced them to confront not only Gerald's crimes, but also their own actions and motivations. Family therapy had been difficult but necessary. My father struggled with guilt over his role in the poisoning, even though he now understood that Gerald had been drugging him with memory-affecting medication to make him more compliant and forgetful about their criminal activities. "I keep trying to remember when I agreed to Gerald's plans," he said during one particularly emotional session. "But there are months where my memory is just fog." He was controlling my mind while I thought I was making my own decisions. My mother's journey was different, but equally challenging. She had to confront her own jealousy and resentment about my success feelings that Gerald had manipulated and amplified to serve his purposes. "I was proud of you," she admitted through tears, "but I was also scared that you wouldn't need us anymore. Gerald convinced me that your success would destroy our family, but he was the one destroying us all along." The family business had survived Gerald's embezzlement, though it required extensive financial restructuring and legal oversight. Insurance claims and recovered assets had restored most of the stolen funds, and Richardson Construction was slowly rebuilding its reputation under new management principles that emphasized transparency and ethical oversight. My father had stepped back from day-to-day operations, choosing instead to focus on family relationships and personal healing. He established a scholarship fund for students from troubled family backgrounds, using his experience with manipulation and abuse to help others recognize and escape similar situations. I had started my position at Morrison Blake and Associates with a unique specialization in cases involving family-based financial crimes. My experience with Gerald's manipulation had given me insights that helped other families recognize and address similar patterns of abuse and control. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply rewarding. I helped expose embezzlement schemes, prosecuted cases of elder financial abuse, and provided legal support for families torn apart by white-collar crime. Each victory felt like justice, not only for my clients but also for my own family's suffering. 1 year after Gerald's sentencing, we held a quiet family gathering to mark Madison's clean bill of health and my first anniversary at the law firm. Instead of a lavish country club celebration, we chose a simple backyard barbecue at my parents' house with just immediate family and a few close friends. The contrast with my graduation party could not have been more stark. Where that evening had been built on hidden resentments and poisonous secrets, this gathering was characterized by honest communication and genuine affection. My parents expressed pride in my achievements, without the undertone of fear and manipulation that had once tainted their support. Madison had brought her new boyfriend, a medical student she had met in her anatomy class, and watching her laugh freely without the shadow of family tension was like seeing her truly alive for the first time in years. "You know what I've learned through all of this," Madison said, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the Connecticut sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Family isn't about control or manipulation or even shared blood. It's about people who choose to love and support each other even when things get difficult." As she spoke, I thought about the long journey we had traveled from that terrible night at Greenwich Hospital to this moment of peace and healing. Gerald's crimes had nearly destroyed us, but ultimately, they had forced us to become a stronger and more honest family than we had ever been before. The legal system had delivered justice, but the real victory was more personal. We had learned to communicate without fear, to express love without conditions, and to support each other's dreams without feeling threatened by each other's success. My father raised his glass of lemonade in a toast that would have been impossible during the Gerald years. To family, he said, "Not because we share the same name, but because we choose to share the same values." As we clinked glasses in the fading daylight, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from our nightmare. Sometimes the people who love us most can hurt us deepest, but healing is possible when truth replaces silence and justice replaces fear. Family loyalty doesn't mean blind trust, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Most importantly, I had learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act with integrity, even when you're terrified of the consequences. When Gerald forced me to choose between saving myself and protecting my sister, I discovered that real love sometimes means accepting danger to protect the people who matter most. Gerald Patterson had tried to destroy our family through manipulation, poisoning, and murder, but his crimes had ultimately revealed the strength and resilience that existed beneath years of dysfunction and control. We emerged from the experience not unmarked but unbroken, ready to build a future based on honesty rather than fear. 2 years later, I received a letter from Gerald in federal prison. He was dying of cancer and wanted to apologize for the pain he had caused our family. After much consideration, I chose not to respond. Some wounds heal better without the weight of forced forgiveness, and Gerald's crimes had consequences that no apology could erase. But I kept the letter as a reminder of how quickly trust can be betrayed and how important it is to recognize the warning signs of manipulation and control. My work helping other families navigate similar crises had taught me that Gerald's methods weren't unique. There are people in every community who use financial control, emotional manipulation, and even physical threats to maintain power over their victims. The key to survival is recognizing that you deserve relationships based on respect rather than control, support rather than manipulation, and love rather than fear. When someone tries to diminish your achievements, isolate you from opportunities, or make you feel guilty for your success, those are warning signs that require immediate attention and often professional help. I want to ask you something. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone you trusted tried to control or manipulate you through fear, guilt, or financial pressure? How did you recognize what was happening, and what steps did you take to protect yourself and your family? Please share your story in the comments below, because your experience might help someone else recognize similar warning signs in their own life. If this story resonated with you, or if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of recognizing family manipulation and financial abuse, please like this video and share it with people who care about family safety and justice. And if you want to hear more stories about people who fought back against injustice and won, please subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest content. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that no matter how powerless you might feel in the face of manipulation or abuse, there are always people and resources available to help you fight back and reclaim your life. You deserve relationships built on love and respect, not fear and control.